Meanwhile, holiday spending in the U.S. grows 3.1% this year. It's according to preliminary insights from Mastercard Spending Pulse. The latest report showing apparel and restaurant as some of the top categories for shopping this year. So, did you get a check on the consumer here, Julie? It's courtesy of Mastercard out with this new report. The headline is U.S. retail sales rose 3.1% between November 1st and December 24th. Apparently slower than last year's rise, but maybe not too surprising given some of the challenges we know consumers have been facing with inflation and higher rates. Under the hood of the report, some interesting trends to call out there. Apparel was up about 2%, restaurant up about 8% during the period. Purchases of electronics and jewelry were not as good. Of course, the question is now sort of what happens next in the months and quarters ahead of 2024.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, there was a slowdown in spending from last year, in the rate of spending. Last year was a 7.6% gain, so definitely pretty sharp there compared with what we had seen, especially considering the inflation that we've seen in the last year. And I don't believe this is an inflation-adjusted number. So just to get that out of the way. It was also interesting to see how people and where people were spending, like physically where they were spending. Online sales were up 6.3%. In-store sales were up 2.2%. So online still proving to be very popular, which I think any of us could have known anecdotally from the number of Amazon and other delivery trucks, right, yeah, and boxes that we are seeing on our neighbors' doorsteps or vestibules, as it were, depending on where folks live. So that's quite interesting as well. Now, whether it's going to continue, you know.
Yeah, that's the big question.
We'll see.
Well, because there's and it really is interesting because as the consumer goes, the economy goes, and there's so many interesting cross currents. And we've spoken to a lot of smart economists and strategists because on the one hand, you're trying to navigate the labor market is still sturdy, inflation's cooling, gas prices, we've talked to pros on that as well, coming down, maybe some possible Fed easing in the pipeline. But on the other hand, you'll get folks who are a little bit more skeptical and they'll say dwindling savings they'll talk about, right? So there are some challenges. You'll also hear about just from the companies we've heard from recently. I thought Nike, for example, we broke those earnings last week, and when they started talking about the executives there about maybe that second half softer revenue outlook. So hard to tell which way it's going to fall out here in 2024.
Yeah, it is difficult. But as we know, people who bet against the consumer this year, that was the wrong call. And we also know from some of the consumer sentiment surveys that consumers are expecting inflation to decelerate pretty sharply. So that's a good sign for that. We'll see how that then.
And of course, as we always mention too, there are many kinds of consumers, right?
Yes.
And how those challenges affect them depends where on the ladder you're sitting.
Yes, a good caveat.